Very good evening and welcome to this edition of The Fourth Estate. Let me start with a big apology to you, all our viewers. We're starting the show rather late, and we will be starting with one guest, and the other guest will be joining us along the way. This has happened because the guest we were counting on is not been able to make it to studio, and we're unable to get to them on phone. I'll be announcing who that is. Ona Peter Komoles is also traveling, and therefore is not in studio with us, as is our regular guest, our regular almost semi-permanent panelist, Ivan Okuda, who was unable to make it this evening. But let me welcome, coming back to studio for the second time in a row, Enoch Twinobuyu.
Yes.
Enoch, very nice to have you once again.
Very happy to be here and happy to always discuss the economy. Yeah.
Yes, we're continuing the discussion on the state of the economy, what has gone wrong, what hasn't gone right, exactly what's going on. And we were supposed, if you're watching, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, Matia Kasaije, we're expecting you in studio, and we're still waiting. We're hoping that maybe you can be able to make it, or maybe you've been held up somewhere, or haven't been able to get to you on the phone. So we were expecting the Minister, and the Minister is not here, but we'll be joined by another guest as we go along with the discussion. Enoch is a PhD student at the University of South Africa. Which one is that?
Yeah, that's University of South Africa.
University of South Africa.
Yeah.
And we did have him last week. Since we had a discussion last week
Yes.
about the state of the economy, things haven't really gone much different. What we saw during the week is a statement coming out of one of the major retailers in the country, an international retailer, in the name of Nakumatt, confirming or announcing, after a wide range of social media discussion and debate about empty shelves, of their having financial difficulties and working to find partners who can inject some significant financing to be able to get back on their footing.
Yep.
What kind of signal does that send?
I think I did allude to this last week. What we've had is stability overall, but the micro issues that we should ideally be dealing with, particularly because when you look at an economy, you have the supply side and you have the demand side. Now, I would want to reiterate that the demand side is rather small. And the issues that we're facing, we have supply. Nakumatt will come and supply, all these banks will come and supply, but they are grappling with a small middle income. And this issue has got to be dealt with. I'll give you an example. Look at the median Ugandan today. A median Ugandan is 15 years old. And the economic characteristics of a 15 years old are rather unpromising at this point in time. So these are some of the issues.
They can only make a future market. They don't make today's market.
They don't make today's market. And that's the challenge that we're facing. And also, I want to say that if you look at the last, from probably 2008 to now, the economy has lost the fundamental buffers. And this is in form of, we're running what we call the twin deficit. We have a current account deficit. That's the trade balance, basically. We have a negative trade balance, and it's widening.
It's almost 50%. It's almost 50% when you look at it of our exports.
That's true. Yes. Yeah, that's true. We basically import twice what we export.
Yes.
We have lost our reserves. We used to have reserves of about 6 months of import value. They have reduced at some point to about 3.5 months. So we've lost that buffer. We've come back for a long time. In about 25 years, we'd never had inflation reach 30%. In 2011, we saw inflation hit 30%. And those are some of, and you know, once you have inflation, incidentally, again, it eats into the value of money. But
there must be a fundamental that we don't just arrive at this by accident.
True.
Economists like you should be able to see that this is where we're headed, because what we fail to do today in the economy can be you can work it into how the economy will perform in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years. The investments you make today, even at an individual level, but more at a country level, dictate or can enable you to predict where you'll be in the next future. I mean, in the next few years.
I think if you look again at the planning cycle, these issues have been foreseen. If you look at the planned investments, we needed to address the infrastructure gap. That's what the NDP1 was all about. As you address infrastructure gaps, you create linkages with productivity, and that eventually enhances, you know, aggregate demand, domestic aggregate demand. But what we see is that even where the infrastructure investments are happening, they are not creating domestic demand, they are creating external demand. And that increases pressure.
Can you explain that? How are they creating external demand and at the expense of domestic demand?
Incidentally, let's say, for example, Karuma, a lot of materials that would be used on Karuma are not purchased domestically.
Are not produced?
Yeah, they are not produced domestically. They are imported. So they come with that import demand, and essentially that creates pressure on the shilling.
So effectively what you're saying is that if you're building Karuma
Yep.
and December,
Yep.
the country's biggest hydropower projects
Yes.
or hydropower infrastructure, and you expect that you'll be producing between the two of them, you'll be producing maybe about 600 megawatts of power.
Yeah.
The president has, I've been told of a meeting where he said people joking around or playing around with Karuma are playing with his legacy. He's looking to this as his legacy. But if you are importing cement that builds Karuma and December, if you're importing the steel bars from China, what you're doing is you're not creating a domestic market.
That's true.
For steel production, you're creating a market for China. But I thought the whole essence of China being able to advance you the money through Exim Bank is China has a selfish interest.
That's true.
It doesn't have, it can't make your economy for you, but if they can take advantage of the economy, they will take advantage of your economy. So if they can create a market for their steel, they can create a market for their cement, they can create a market for, they can create jobs for their citizens, then that works for them. What is it we're not doing on our side?
That's true, but we've seen the Chinese fund investments, for example, in Ethiopia. And there's a very good local content inbuilt in the construction of, for example, the Renaissance Dam. The Renaissance Dam has more of the inward looking, and this is a project that was conceived in 2012.
Renaissance Dam, that is the 6,000,
6,000, yeah,
yes.
it's 10 times.
Yes.
And you realize, to a great extent, 50% of the revenue for building that dam was raised through a domestic bond at 1.23%. This is much lower than we're borrowing from the Chinese.
From Exim Bank.
Yes. And that comes as a result of creating public confidence. If you come and create public confidence that, one, the local content is going to be protected. Secondly, you also have purchasing. You basically also have high levels of transparency. Then that you can easily mobilize resources on the domestic market.
The major argument that has been made is President Museveni makes that argument every day. Everybody in government I have heard, and economists who seem to understand the way the government thinks, have made an argument that make the right infrastructure investments today, you will reap from them. The question of energy has been central. The question of roads or access to the market has been central. But one of the other things that we've been trying to focus on a lot as Uganda, with Uganda in the driving seat, is to create a larger market of the East African community.
That's true.
If you add South Sudan to Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, and Burundi, you're talking about 160 million.
About that,
yes, about that. Yes, about 160 million people. The bigger question no one ever tries to answer is this just numbers of people, or is this an actual market?
And that's probably what I started with. It's the quality of the population that you have. If you have a very dependent population, then you do not necessarily have what we call effective demand. What you have is population, but it's not effective demand. And that cannot translate. And I've talked about this, and I said what we will grapple with is that we will struggle in future because we're going to borrow for these infrastructure investments. And it's an undisputed fact that we need infrastructure investments. But look at the last, and we've had a World Bank study here that has told us that for every investment shilling we have invested, we've got 70% return on those. And the challenge is that if you do not realize the effectiveness in your investments, then you will not be able to harness the infrastructure dividend over the longer term. That's my biggest worry, that a lot of investments, and we've seen probably Even the World Bank, for example, now, because of the absorption issues, has already withheld its own funding.
So if you had to speak, assume we had Minister Kasaija here, and I'm hoping that he's watching us, or someone, maybe a personal assistant is watching and is should be able to tell him that this guy is asking for you where you are now, because you're expecting him to be here. If you were to advise the government of Uganda, the Minister for Finance, Planning and Economic Development, what are the 3 key things they need or we need to be doing as a country to make sure that not only do we rescue the current situation, but also are able to put this economy on firmer rails for the future?
I think one would be sequencing of public investments, because when you front load all the public investments at a go, and we saw with the NDP, 78% of the planned investments were realized. And essentially, a lot of them, and we have a number of projects that are started. For example, I'll give you, even the Entebbe Express Highway, it's a project that is beyond, if you look at the planned completion, it's lagging behind. So we have a lot of planned investments that are happening, but we're not increasing the capacity to invest. And that's a big challenge. If you're going to have a project...
We have a lot of infrastructure investment without expanding, planned, without capacity to
invest.
Yes.
If you look at, for example, Karuma, it's been time and again in court. And it's already an indicator. This is a project that had been in the budget documents for almost 3 years before even the loan was signed. So there's a problem of planning. There's a mismatch between planning and what is actually happening with the negotiation of credit. So I think if you ask me what actually needs to happen is we need to have proper sequencing as we build capacity. But instead of front loading and then you start building capacity, then there's a mismatch, because you will have these projects, you will have signed loans, and you will not have absorption.
Do we have, or should we have, that patience as a country? The patience of sequencing, whether we like it or not. This is a country that is more than 100 years old.
That's true.
Since the British founded it and put it together, Uganda as a country has existed. We've been independent for the last 54 years.
That's true.
Yes. So if we're still where we are, and you're talking about sequencing, you're talking about building of capacity, some people are going to be asking, wait a minute, in which world are we trying to compete? In which world are we trying to fit ourselves as a competitive economy, but also to better the lives of the people of this country?
But what's the alternative? The alternative would be that you're going to have suboptimal investments. And that means that once you have suboptimal investments, you won't reap the long-term benefits.
Have we learned any lessons along the way?
I'm not very...
we've talked about everything we're talking about now before.
Yeah.
The question is, why have we not been able to do the things we have talked about doing over the years?
I think they're and I think that's a question for the minister. I see from the numbers, and I commend Ministry of Finance and Bank of Uganda that they put out all this information. Bank of Uganda, Ministry of Finance does a public debt assessment. The Auditor General does utilization of credit every year, and the issues are there. The recommendations are there, but the follow-up is quite limited, and that's where I see the gap. And what needs to be done is that we need to walk the talk. The Hakuna Mchezo has got to come on. We need to walk the talk.
Okay. Yeah. Just one question before we take a break. Some people say there is a mantra that believes, or that says, never waste a good crisis. What is the good crisis existing today?
I'm not sure we have
it. Should tap into.
There are two things. One is that there's a suspension there's a withholding of loans by the World Bank, and that is a wake-up call. One, it's basically looking at public investment management, and I think there's a good opportunity if we can harness and improve our effectiveness in public investment management. This is a whole project cycle management, starting from the design, the preparation of the projects. We must have economic appraisal of these projects, because these infrastructure investments give you about 7% annual return. But if you're borrowing at 5%, you have a red tape of about 3%, you're already not going to harness that return. So I see a good potential around public investment management. Because when you have market failure, that's what we're trying to see with the Nakumatt and the Crane Bank. Once you start having market failure, you need strong presence. And if you don't have effectiveness on this side, then you're going to have dual failure. You're going to have private failure and you have public failure.
Yes, I hear you on that. We need to take a quick commercial break, and we hope that by the time we come back, we'll have been joined by another guest. And let me again remind the Minister that we're expecting you in studio, and unfortunately, you're not in here, so apologies to our viewers for not having a full panel tonight. But we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. That was a little longer break. Apologies, but we have been joined on site by Mr. Ramadan Gobi. He is an economist. He's been writing a lot, and your writings, Ramadan, have been making it into wider discussions. I saw Charles Onyango-Bo in his weekly column the other day refer to your writings, and I have had other people refer to your writings, especially with the current developments in our economy. Very nice to have you.
Thank you very much, Charles, and glad to be.
And thank you very much for making it at rather very short notice. But Peter Watching says, my brother Charles, you never discuss the political leadership issue at all. At all, times 100. Why? It's as if policy making is totally divorced from economics. Yet, the bad economic situation we are going through is largely due to poor policy making, mismanagement of public funds, and poor or no policy implementation. The Politburo has had to build a small and poor or no policy has had to build a small, highly favored class of previously peasant group. Today, these are filthy, wealthy group from ill-gotten public funds. They've derived from these ring-fenced sectors and are now strategically eyeing oil to rip off the nation again and again. Well, this is a very unhappy Ugandan watching the show and asking why we don't go into the politics, the political economy. Yeah. and as we're just trying to go into the, to keep watching what's been going on. Two major developments. One is Pastor Kakande is the subject of a parliamentary investigation over sand mining. And the president was at his event on Friday and handed him an envelope of 50 million shillings to support some of his activities. And then another one, Kizza Besigye manages to make a return into the country without drama. And then there's drama at his house today with the police. And one of the stories we'd had recently was that the police was in crisis, running loan funds, largely because they're spending a lot of money running after Besigye. Now, I don't know how that ties into the economy and marries the politics. But Ramadan, let me start with you. In your own assessment, what is the state of the health of our economy today?
Thank you, Charles. I think I've been very loud on this. I've made a lot of noise about the state of the economy for some time now. I think in a few words I can say the economy is seriously sick, because a number of macro indicators, we can use them to look at this. You know, when we're analyzing the economy, you need to bring in a few facts. Since I think 2009-10, the economy has not achieved its growth target of about 7%. The average growth rate when you put in those 6 years is about 5.7%. When you look at the inflation itself, inflation has been very stubborn in this period of about 6 years, since 2011, an average of 9.9%. Look at the exchange rate, you know, the rate at which we are exchanging our currency of foreign currencies. In the 6 months after September, the shilling depreciated by 33.7%. And I think it was one of the fastest, you know, depreciation kind of rates in the world.
And one of the fastest depreciating economy, I mean currencies in the world.
Yes. Bloomberg News one time, you know, recorded us to be one of the worst, you know, economies, even after Zimbabwe, what we saw in Zimbabwe. So there have been a number of things that's at a macro level. But when you come even micro, you find that those macro indicators feed in the micro performance. The people are broke, I think. Charles, I don't know whether you have some money. Many people will tell you.
I used to, I had decided never to say that there is no money, or that if you translated it directly, yes, to generalize and say, sente zibuze, as they will say in Uganda, in Luganda.
Yes.
Because a senior official in this government told me once, said, no, never cry that money is lost. Say, I don't have money. Now, I was revising that the other day, because if you receive 1, 2, 3 phone calls from different people, friends you know, or you are discussing in the office or among peers, and then everybody says, man, I am broke. I am broke. If you have more than 3, that means you can generalize.
Yes.
I think so.
You know,
but I would want, I'd want to add a footnote. You know, economic plays on expectations and confidence.
Yeah.
And I agree with Ramadan. We have challenges, but I have probably a softer spot to say the economy is deteriorating, but it is not seriously sick. It has longer term challenges, I agree. But when you look at growth, for example, yes, we've grown at 5%, but this is 5% above adjusted for inflation. So if in nominal terms, we are growing at an inflation of say 10% plus 5%. So the economy is growing at 15%.
No.
If it's,
you know,
because this is, we're talking about, what you're talking about is real growth.
Yeah.
That is growth adjusted for inflation.
Targets we set, they are also in real terms.
I agree.
And we are not, hitting them. And for a long time, because in the recent years, since we reformed the economy in the early 90s, we had not seen a period like the one we have
so
endured.
What explains
quite a
this?
long
But
time.
is it unique? Is it unique to Uganda, or is it? It's a global
Regionally,
trend? It's a global trend.
of course, admittedly, as a region, there have been some, challenges. But it's still, when you put Uganda on other, countries within the region, you find that still our performance is below the regional performance in most cases. Recently, we have been making this analysis, and even the official, statistics. When you look at background to the budget of this year,
2016.
you realize these guys actually came out clearly, the Minister of Finance, and said we are not doing well.
But let me give you an example.
Analysis, diagnosis of the problem is one thing. The bigger question is, why are we where we are?
Yeah.
What has failed? Because you quote the period between 2009, 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
The rest of the world, especially the Western world, was going through an economic recession in 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
The talk in Kampala was, we have survived. Our fundamentals are right, and we are weathering the storm. Then we arrive 2011, 2012, and we begin facing the real heat. And the thinking is, okay, what was happening to the world is arriving in Uganda late. But for Uganda specifically, what has gone wrong?
So I think we have done a lot of rosy scenarios for a long time. Rosy scenarios is also an alternative to fiscal policy and monetary policy, where you try to give people good information when you try to hide the realities on the ground for quite a long time. You prepare people, a bit differently from how you should have prepared them. I think the economic crisis must have affected us, but we tried to behave as if we are the guys who are
the talk then was that if I could bring in Enoch again. Enoch, from your own assessment, what went wrong, especially 2009, 2010?
Let me actually say this. And as I wanted to actually build on Ramadan's, if you're saying, because you look at growth has slowed in the whole sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah. Last year in 2015, sub-Saharan Africa grew at the lowest rate in the last 15 years. So the problem is not unique to Uganda. And particularly in 2011, if you look at inflation in all the regional counterparts, it was in double figures. It was in double figures. It wasn't unique to Uganda. However, what we see is that while inflation in most of the economies there was an imported element also, because oil prices had gone up in 2009-10. But also what we saw here is that there was increased monetization. There was increased quite a spiral of
and a
monetary
drought
growth.
which brought food prices.
Yeah, and the drought, yes, because it was regional. But you see, other countries, for example, and of course that's from a non-liberal market. Tanzania had to impose food bans on.
I see Burundi has imposed the food ban now.
Exactly.
If you don't export ban.
So the question is, it's a question again for economists and politicians, that if you have a challenge of shortage of food on your market, do you leave your market open or do you close it?
How do factors like South Sudan come into play? The conflict in South Sudan.
Yeah, South Sudan
does it impact in any way?
Came in later because
does,
you know
it
we were
does.
recovering. Yeah, we were recovering very well when South Sudan came back on board. You know, South Sudan contributed first to the problem in Uganda in 2008 when it emerged from the war, and it started to import a lot of our food, and it caused here very high demand for food from Uganda, and the prices of food went up, and so many other items. You know, Uganda has been in the Dubai for South Sudan for quite a long time. But then South Sudan got its own problems after they got the independence, and then they fought again, and so that caused now challenges in terms of our export earnings, because when we had now filled the gap of the food, because when they came on board, they demanded food, we grew more food, because now we had a good market. And we sold a lot of food to South Sudan. We were bringing in $1 million every day. And then this war comes, and the export, you know, earnings now collapse.
They were our biggest informal trading partner.
There is a whole debate about markets like South Sudan, because it's a good excuse if you're explaining it politically. The debate has been, what you're selling food to South Sudan, leaving your people starving because prices go up. Your neighbors, Kenya, who have not been, yes, they have hosted South Sudanese over the years. What kind of business are they doing? If you're bringing in $1 million every day, what is Kenya taking every day? Because it's into manufactured goods, it's into a vibrant service sector. For you, your people are riding borders in Juba. Kenyans are, for example, opening banks, running banks. Is there a difference in, is there an impact in what kind of things we say we export that bring in the dollars?
I think overall what we should be looking at is the trade balance. We should aim at narrowing our trade deficit, probably in the long term, because you cannot sustainably run a trade deficit, because there, when you run a trade deficit, you're building up what we call contingent liabilities. And you cannot, because once you have a trade deficit, you've got to finance it with inflows of foreign direct investments. But this financing, foreign financing, is not sustainable over a longer period of time. So you need to aim at narrowing. And the challenge we have is that we keep talking about agriculture, but do we have a comparative advantage or a comparative advantage paradox? Because over the long term, we can talk about the 360 billion for operation, buying seedlings, coffee seedlings, but without addressing the whole value chain of coffee. Because coffee now, the biggest challenge it faces is climate change. And we've seen that even now, the amount of coffee that we export, about 3.5 million bags of 60 kgs, it's more or less what we used to export.
Yeah, we're at the same export levels as we were in 1974.
And I will tell you, the last time we ran it...
No, coffee hasn't been growing, but definitely we need to invest in there.
I think I'm told the recovery now has balanced out with what we were, I think, around 1974.
Exactly, yes. Because we were doing about 3.2, now we're doing about 3.5.
But also remember...
But the last time we did a trade surplus was actually in 1970s when we had a ban on exports. That's the last time. But of course, and again, don't misquote me, it's a tricky question on whether we should actually open up, you know, or we should have mitigated controls around, you know, especially to suit your economy.
You know, opening up is one thing, and plucking out the door and you throw it away is another thing. I think what we did when we were advised to open up our economy, for us we removed the door and threw it away. So,
so allow free entry and exit at anyone.
Yes, we don't have any control over what comes in and what
is the question about, someone asked about the planning, policy and planning. Where do these intersect? Because we have been told on the policy front, we are solid. We have some of the best policies in the world, and we perform well. And like Enoch, maybe you need to help me. You guys are the economists. I'm not an economist. But if you look at the numbers, the raw numbers, Uganda's growth levels, even when the the region has been troubled, the numbers for Uganda are way low. If you compare with Rwanda, if you compare with Kenya's performance, if you compare with Tanzania, where we have had some bit of better performance is Burundi and South Sudan within the region. If
you look at over a longer period of time, Uganda is one of the best performing, actually better than the region. But if you factor in the per capita and you look at growth vis-a-vis population, then Uganda is one of the worst performing. So now it tells you that the growth you've been having has not been distributed.
No, before you go there, Enoch, even in absolute terms, before you go into per capita performance, you find that we were doing so well until after 2008-9. You guys, we need to concentrate on this period.
The question is, what went wrong in 2008-9?
To date, Uganda has never been the same again in the way we were doing things. And may I have a few reasons I know which have affected us a lot. One is the resurgence of fiscal indiscipline. All of a sudden, politics took a center stage in determining our fiscal allocations and fiscal performance. Before 2008-9, we were fiscally very disciplined. Money used to go a lot, practically, in the development, docket of the budget. Today, on paper, that's what is shown. But when it comes to expenditure, at MOOBS we have an economic forum where we have had the analysis of some of these issues we're talking about. We had an analysis on budget performance, and we found that most of for example, the supplementary budgets were going to the consuming sectors within the economy by cutting from the development sectors of the economy. And this trend begins to become prominent around 2008-9, onwards. But before that, budgets were...
Do you conclude on why? Why is that particularly...
I think it's a shared opinion, even by Minister of Finance. When you read their reports, they show that, the development budget, for example, has underspent over the last 5 years, has underspent, while the recurrent nature budget have overspent.
Politics.
It is...
I mean, what's unique about the politics of 2008-9 from the politics of, say, 2005-6?
I think before this political contest used to be more, of almost no contest. But after we removed the term limits, the politics became too much of an activity.
So you're saying this coincides with the removal of term limits, because you removed term limits in 2005, head into an election in 2006, ran one term. By 2008-9, you're beginning to think about things. Processes are beginning for the next election cycle, which is 2011.
I think for me, like I said earlier, is that we had an influx, we had an increase in the focus on infrastructure. We're moving away from the social sector focus with the Poverty Eradication Action Plan. We're going for a national development plan that focuses on infrastructure. Now, with those increased investments and not a match even the president was saying in the State of the Nation that with UNRWA
failed
over the last, because that was in the Statement of the Nation, we lost 5,000 kilometers. But over the last 30 years, we have delivered 5,000 kilometers. So in 7 years, we've lost what we delivered in 30 years.
But we would have thought those kilometers should be adding in some multiplier in the economy, but it's not seen.
I think we also need to audit that a little bit more, which we'll try to do after a short commercial break. Let me just take a message. One of your students, one of your former students, called David Isimbwa, says, we are glad to see an excellent economist Ramadan Gobi, he'll prove the solution. The former students have confidence in him. We'll take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, I need you gentlemen, as economists, to help me untangle. We always talk about economic growth. We do not talk about economic development. And I am wondering if we can keep carrying Nakati, Buga, and other things and take them to the market in South Sudan and say, provided it's bringing in the dollars, we are comfortable. We're happy where we are. What else do we need to be doing? After a short commercial break. Welcome to the last segment of the Fourth Estate tonight, and I think our phone lines will be on the screen shortly. You can share with us your views and opinions about the state of the Ugandan economy. Once again, I'd like to share with your viewers that we had expected to be with the Minister for Finance, but for some reason, he's been unable to make it. And we have Ramadan Gobi, he's an economist, and Enoch Tunoburio, who is also an economist. They're helping us navigate through the challenges that we have seen develop in the economy over the last few days. We're heading into what's supposed to be the happy season, Christmas season. We're heading into November as soon as Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yes, Tuesday will be 1st, is it?
1st November,
yes,
yeah.
It will be 1st November. And the big question is, as we move towards through November, December, which is the spending period, how do we get there? How does that impact on inflation and other things? But let me just ask a quick question of you economists for the benefit of our viewers. What's the difference between economic growth and economic development? And when we say Uganda has had sustained economic growth stretching for decades of above 7% until 2008, 2009, what is it we're doing? What's the difference?
Growth is basically the level of economic activity in the economy. Development is shared economic activity in a layman, but in broader terms, what is produced or consumed in an economy would be economic growth. But development, you must have development. I mean, you must have growth accompanied with other segments. You must have poverty reduction. You must have a reduction in income inequality. You must have employment being created. You must have all the other social indicators, the Human Development Index improving in terms of literacy. So that's kind of encompassing. Now, the growth that we have had has not translated into employment creation as much. The service sector that leads the growth as the growth driver only creates less than 1 million people.
A million jobs.
And by this statistically, formally we have less than 1 million people earning more than 1 million shillings. So has that growth delivered meaningful employment?
Isn't that because a majority of the population are actually not captured in the formal economy?
Exactly. You have 69, last week the minister told us, 69% is in subsistence farming.
Yeah, but if you're talking about subsistence farming, I wanted to put the same question to Gobi. The difference between economic growth and economic development, which Enoch is trying to explain.
Growth is quantitative. It's just getting the GDP growing in terms of the goods you produce and the services in every year. But yet, for development, it's the quality of life of people. So development is more to do with how do you, first of all, distribute what you have produced, and who's producing it. You know, growth can easily come into a country when it's not yours, when there are foreigners who are producing it, for example. Whereas development has to be, the indigenous people who are producing and benefiting from
development.
You feel it in your household.
Let me put my next question to Enoch.
Yes.
If I have an uncle, for example, in Kazo, somewhere in Buremba, and he's able to produce from his cows milk, and at the end of the month, he's putting onto the market 800 liters, 500 liters of milk per day. 500 liters of milk and selling each liter at, say, 500 shillings. At the end of the month, he's able to put together 1 million shillings as his earning. but is not captured in your formal economy.
That's true.
What you'll capture is my colleague in the production studio there, who's working late and earning $1 million shillings. This one is captured. So if you are trying to tabulate economic growth and development, where do you place the other guy who is in the informal sector but actually making the money, same as a guy somewhere down in Chikubo?
Usually what happens, and Uganda now, 49% is informal. So essentially you have more or less half the population, you know, in the informal sector and the other in the formal sector. But what happens is that you can use the proxy, because and the numbers that I was giving you are essentially the formal sector, the less than 1 million earning.
Yes,
that is in the formal sector. But usually what you find in the informal sector is actually informality, and less, you will find very few people surviving with a high, you know, level of monetization in the commercial business that they do. And you know, like the people you're talking about, you know, look at the informal sector, it's largely agriculture. You know, the service sector, yes, has, but that's a smaller component.
Okay.
So essentially what I'm trying to say is that the formal sector will give you a good representation. But if you try to strip the informal sector in Uganda, you will find that the guys who are producing in Kazo are not very many.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move the discussion, because we have a few minutes to end the debate. Ramadan, you authored an article in the Sunrise, and the central question you're asking, what are they not telling us in relation to the troubles around Crane Bank? The Independent has written an excellent article trying to go behind the scenes and tell us what exactly was going on, the discussions, and we're discussing that off the air with Enoch before you came in.
Okay.
What is it you suspect we are not being told?
One, I think, first of all, Ugandans need to know how the fourth largest bank in the country,
By assets.
by assets, and the fifth by, you know, the deposits, can easily get off the radar in the way, the fashion, you know, Crane Bank went off the radar. Because, you know, Crane Bank, many people thought, because it was the fastest growing, you know, commercial bank, and also one of the banks which have always been winning awards as the, you know, the best bank in the country. And many people had decided to believe that it was going into that category of the too big to fail, or too important to fail, if at all such categories exist. Then all of a sudden, bam, the bank is failing, you know. Enoch and I have been, you know, talking about these things on our social media and our informal kind of discussions. You find that this cannot just come as it was, you know, made for us to believe. Then Bank of Uganda comes and tells us, you know, this is a bank we have been watching, fair, and it hasn't been doing well, a few things. And they stop there, you know. They just want to tell us that it is capital adequacy, which they were missing as a key indicator of financial sensitivity of the bank, or what the prudential infrastructure is supposed to be. But we are Ugandans, and some of us have been around, have been watching some of the things. So in that article, I try to bring the entire banking sector in perspective. Today it could be Crane Bank, but I think if this trend continues, the way we handle these banks, you know, in that article I equate the bank to a smoker. A bank is like a smoker. For that matter, some people think actually they are addicted to drugs. The way you see a smoker who's addicted to drugs is a person whom you will, like on that cigarette
Addicted
packet.
to the nicotine.
Yes. There is a word, health, Ministry of Health warning. This thing you're going to smoke causes lung cancer, heart disease, and you die. But you will find someone is reading on it and is puffing away. You know, that means that person needs help. He's not, you know, in his rightful, he's not taking it out of will, because nobody wants to die.
He's just an addict.
He's an addict. So likewise, banks, there are certain habits which we know when they do them, they practice them, they will face, you know, challenges. One of them is bad loans. You make bad loans, you are going under. And what are these bad loans? You know, you need to, I'm sure banks employ, economists employ, financial analysts and others, those who can assess the market. When I saw in the election year, Crane Bank giving out so many loans in election year where political risk is at its highest, and the investment portfolios are reducing, and you find those loans going to real estates and agriculture and those other related sectors which are risky, very risky, then you know that this bank is not doing its job well. You know, the bank has a...
Would that be... Enoch, you want to come in? So before I put a question.
I think two things. One is that for me, I would want to start by saying it is a very commendable job by Bank of Uganda to come in and actually take action. Otherwise, you know, the minister was telling you you'd have systematic risk. However, you know, the kind of, if you look at the developments...
I'm reading The Independent, and basically what their conclusion is,
yes,
or their investigation says, is between Bank of Uganda and the Ministry of Finance, they watched that bank collapse.
I have probably a difference of opinion, in the sense that you look at the financial statement, this financial statement published in March for December 2015, the capital to risk weighted assets was at 16%. Now, at the time they closed it, it had gone down, they were failing to meet 4%. So there is definitely something that developed in a short time. It is not that it was a sequenced problem that was not managed by the bank. And essentially what happens also is that before you pull the plug, there are a number of procedures that the bank has got to take. And that's what exactly the bank was doing. However, I also suspect
Which
that...
bank now? The central bank?
The central bank. The central bank. And I agree with Ramadan that there are adverse selection of loans. When you lend to people when you've not done your due diligence, then you have that adverse selection problem. But also what I see is that, you know, as of end of December, Crane Bank had 1.3 trillion of deposits. And these could not have, you know, waned off in a short spell of 8 months. You know, to fail to meet the minimum capital requirement, because the loans, which is their biggest asset.
I think the Financial Institutions Act provides that if a loan is not performing for 3 months...
For 3 months.
For three.
Starts between 3 and 6.
Yes, between 3 and 6. For the first 3 months, you are required. There's categorization. You're supposed to pay 20% of it. If it's not performing, then you pay 50%. That grows to 50%. If it doesn't still perform, you're supposed to...
You cover the...
You cover the entire loan 100%. And what the central bank is doing is you don't have to put in cash. It goes to your statutory reserves and picks money off. So it collapses you.
Yeah,
true.
Yes.
And that's exactly what happened with Ukraine. But my point is, prudentially, BO is doing a good job, like he's saying, fantastically, of watching. I will not manage your bank, but my eyes on you. When you smoke yourself to the grave, then I will come and bury you. And I'm saying that's not good enough for an economy like Uganda. We need to as well bring in economic regulation. With economic regulation, look at these other things which are now taking banks to that kind of reckless behavior, which a smoker, you know, synonymous with that of a smoker. In this case, you look at things like a competition law. You know, in Uganda, we have allowed banks, even, you know, to be run like borders, like matatus. You compete, and if you don't want, you create a cartel, and you agree on the rates which you're going to charge or offer those who are saving with you. And at the end of the day, we have ended up with a banking sector which is so concentrated. I know it's a regional problem, even other countries have them, but when you go and read carefully, countries where competition laws are being implemented, maybe by another agency, it may not be necessarily the central bank, those banks are more, secure and stable.
Is it a problem?
By competition, it's not the number of banks.
Yeah.
If you look at the telecom industry here, it is more competitive than the banking industry.
That's what we are saying.
There are few players.
That's what we are saying.
So it's not the numbers that...
It's not about numbers. We're not saying numbers.
Let me ask the question. Do you think a bank like Crane Bank found itself in a difficult position primarily because of its foundation and its positioning? In a country where you have a lot of commercial banks, you don't have development banks. And Sudhir, born in Katwe, grew up here, went away, came back. People have questions about how he made his money, but in a kind of trying to hold the hands of so many other people whom he understands, he's grown up with, he has a relationship with them, unlike what, for example, the other international banks would have, trying to fill in that gap. Yes, you give the loans, it is expensive, but you're the only one who can give the loans that can help people to try and do business. Mwenda, in his column, argues and says, even when they were able on paper to break even in 5 months, no commercial bank was willing to give them money to keep running, to help shore up their liquidity. And only Crane Bank could without them giving collateral.
That's true.
Yes.
And again, that's what Ramadan touched on in his article. When you have that reckless borrowing, it eventually eats on you. And that's what happened, I think, with Crane Bank. But there's an untold story.
My question is, isn't it a bigger policy failure that you keep talking about a recapitalization of the Uganda Development Bank?
Yeah.
You have a collapsed Uganda Cooperative Bank. You no longer have a Uganda Commercial Bank. People have nowhere to turn. And if someone is going to think and say, look, I think I have an obligation. You could look at both ways. If you look at Sudhir, for example, you're thinking he's a guy who's picked up quite a few properties simply because he lent money to people and they failed to pay. But the other question is, he's the only guy who can take the risk and say, well, I can take this risk. And if the property market tanks,
in the banking also,
he's not taking the risk. He's not taking the risk that you're actually suggesting. He's taking the risk around the same people that the small middle income or the big players. The development bank, and I want to also be quoted, 500 billion, because the sector, you want to recapitalize it by 500 billion. The commercial banking sector is 21 trillion. Yes. This 500 billion can never move or shake the banks. So this kind of recapitalization, yes, it's good. We need to recapitalize. Probably structurally in the long term, we have a sustainable development bank. But in the short term, this 500 billion.
So gentlemen, our time is out. We need to get out of here. But you have the issues around Karuma and Disimba. You have issues around the standard gauge railway. You have issues around a very ambitious road infrastructure development work. Now there is talk that the Daily Monitor is reporting government has decided to recapitalize Crane Bank with 200 billion. I don't know how much that would help given the current situation in which the bank finds itself. You're talking about revival of the national airline. Are these things we can realistically do given the state of what you said is a very sick economy?
I think very quickly I can put my opinion quite clear. I think our government is being ambitious on good things. We need all these things which they are doing, but I think you need to be more realistic with yourself. And we have been saying this, and even our multilateral friends have been telling us exactly that. We need to sequence some of these projects and bring in some element of gradualism. What can we do in a certain time?
Gradualism in hakuna mchezo.
No, you see, hakuna mchezo is
things must be done.
Hakuna mchezo is politics. Yes. Now you come to the economic reality of the day.
That's the question.
So to me, I think,
are we being too ambitious? Are we being too political?
No, too ambitious.
Is it ambition or politics?
I think he said both. But I think that there's one thing that we need to realize. When you get politics, add economics, you get politics. So usually we tend to be the ones at the hitting end, and then the others are bailed out. But Ramadan is quite clear. We are overly ambitious, and sequencing is quite critical. We need to invest in capacity to invest. And on a policy stance, I agree. This current budget, Minister of Finance has decided to pull from domestic borrowing to, for the first time, we had domestic borrowing surpassing private sector credit. As of end of June, government borrowing from the domestic market was outstanding at 11.7 trillion, and private sector credit was at 11.5 trillion. So clearly, and in that year, for several reasons, private sector credit was not growing, and government was growing really fast.
And the impact, of course, is that the private sector credit remains very high, very expensive, because government is a more attractive, attractive borrower than the private sector.
Charles, if I were the Minister of Finance now, I would do a few things as kind of a stopgap measure. The first thing maybe I would do is to warehouse all of the loans.
How do you mean?
In the private sector, especially these big real estate kind of investments which people have with the bank, because they are going to cause a lot of distress in the banking sector. Warehousing loans is when the government comes in and get money, give it to the banks, which is equivalent to the loans. Then the banks transfer all the collateral to you, and then they start to collect that money on a restructured basis. Then they bring the money back to you, and you give them.
Is that possible? Does the government have the money?
What I mean, government can create money, but the banks can't create money
what's
at the
economic
moment.
effect of creating money?
There are diseases. There are also layers in diseases. There is cancer and there is malaria. What we are facing right now,
both can kill,
is cancer. Yes, both can kill, but one will kill you,
malaria will kill you quicker,
painfully, and actually it's not curable. But the other one, you can have some medicine for long-term containment. So to me, I think we need, first of all, to stop this challenge which is going on right now. It's no longer sustainable.
Gentlemen, we need to get out of here. Production is telling me it's actually coming to 11:30. We need to get out of here. Let me just take a message. Honorable Kasaija has admitted glossy economic figures government has been boasting about were actually overstated. Honorable Kasaija has to inform the nation who these crook economists are. It serves nothing to hear about some people misled, misinformed, and caused Museveni to misfire on figures. Politicians like to be told what they want to hear, and that's exactly what economists have been doing. Has there been a lower FDI inflows? No. Have we had war in Uganda? No. Has Uganda had drought in the last 3 years? No.
Yes.
It's just last 6 months. And what has been the impact of 4 trillion UNRWA theft under Broadway stairs by those who supervise the road sector? We've allowed the so-called top, I say Charles, we've allowed the so-called top taxpayers to take away every profit instead of investing it back into the production of the economy. The government has been very happy with economic growth based on lies. Kasaija the other day admitted government has been misled by service sector goons who only collect money from subscribers and depositors, deduct super profits, and pay URA the balance. Is that a fair assessment, gentlemen, would you say?
I don't know. I don't know whether he's really is trying to be so much of condemning a certain section.
It's a very long text. Yes,
that's very true. But I think if you're asking us for our last words, I think what we're seeing is one. And by the way, the economy had grown, but what we saw between 2008 and 9, some of these were recorrection to the real fundamentals. We're growing from a very low base in the early 90s. We were supported by a wind flow of some of the resources, and some of these had stopped coming through. And then we embarked on a very large investment plan that we didn't have potential to invest in. I still see potential to recorrect, but particularly if I may, because we are running out of time.
We are actually out of time already.
The banking, but what Bank of Uganda is doing, and by putting money in Crane Bank, is a normal banking procedure. Anywhere it would happen. You take over the bank. There are panic withdrawals. The bank doesn't have money. You've got to invest in money. Now, whether the money that is being invested is enough, it's another question.
Okay.
But yeah,
I'm afraid I'll cut it there. You have a last word? Or you'd said it already?
Perhaps I think my last one would be that I think we need to retrace ourselves as a country on what made us so tick in the 90s. It was one thing, fiscal discipline, nothing else. What has killed Uganda today, why we are where we are today, to me, I think we have really gotten a lot of things which we can't manage because of politics, and they have created economic kind of...
I'll leave both of you gentlemen and our viewers with one major question. Maybe we'll have an opportunity to discuss it in future. We've talked a lot about building a middle class. I keep asking myself if we have built that middle class. Yes, we have a lot more people sitting in posh coffee shops, shopping in these malls that are mushrooming all over the place. Does a consumer middle class actually mean a middle class for an economy like Uganda? Maybe when we have another opportunity, I'll take opportunity to invite both of you again at some other time to come and have a discussion with us. Thank you very much. Enoch Tunoburiu, an economist. Thank you very much. Ramadan Gobi. Thank you very much to you, all our viewers, for joining us tonight and always. And of course, once again, I apologize. We started the show very late and we didn't have the full cast as we had expected. A special thanks to the two gentlemen who were able to come in and help us navigate through the discussion tonight. From me, it's a good night.